anyone wants to get up and dance for this bit, you're welcome to do that. Do you want to dance? No. That's fair. You stay put. Come on, get up and dance. Thanks very much, folks. That's not on.
Bit more?
Is it on?
Bit more?
It's on now.
Little more?
It's on now. Little more. I don't know. Can you hear me?
How about now?
How about now? Okay, perfect. Hi, folks. Thanks very much for coming out. My name is Sorcha Hegarty. We're Candlelit Tales, and we are going to be telling you some stories. Name of this show is Thank Folk for Stories, because if it wasn't for folk telling folk tales, we wouldn't have the folk tales now. So, in the interest of that, we're going to do something a little bit different. We did it once here before, and I really enjoyed it. So we're going to do it that way again. For anyone who was here on New Year's Day, you'll know what I'm going to say. But basically, I'm going to tell you a story, but then I don't know what's going to happen after this first story, because it's up to you guys to tell me what story you want to hear. Or what story, about a thing you want to hear. So you folks are going to direct the show. Alright? So, does anyone have any ideas to begin with? Because like I said, here's the young man, yes? Small person? What do you want to do? You like the Giant's Causeway? Alright, I think we can accommodate the Giant's Causeway. I think we can do that. Excellent. Okay. That's two stories that we know what we're going to do now, so that's great. The show is shaping up, lads. This is going to be great. We've only got an hour, so we could just tell a really long Giant's Causeway. But to begin with, I'm going to make sure everyone has their sandwiches and is settled in. And then I'm going to tell you a story about a time something absolutely terrible happened. It was really bad. See, there was a huge battle. That wasn't the bad thing. The bad thing happened after the battle. See, after the battle between the Fomorians, the people from under the sea, and the Tuatha Dé Danann, the Shining Ones, after the battle was fought and the Tuatha Dé Danann had won, one of their great heroes found out that a terrible thing had happened. The Dagda, the good god, who was a huge, big, robust man with a great big belly and a great big club, he found out that his harp had been stolen. And that was really serious. Do you know why? Because the Dagda's harp was magic. It was magic in two ways. One way was that it could play an emotion into your heart. If you were sad and he played a happy song, no matter what you were sad about, you'd start to feel happy. And if you were happy and he played a sad song, you'd start to feel really sad. And if it was bedtime and you really didn't feel like going to bed, he'd play a sleepy song and you'd go to sleep. But the other, maybe more important magic of the Dagda's harp was that it could play the seasons and the weather in their turn. So they knew that without the Dagda's harp they were in trouble. Because with no harp to play the seasons in their turning, well, anything could happen. Sure, you might get snow in the middle of summer. You might get hot sun in the middle of winter. And if it went unchecked for too long, the oceans would start to acidify and everything would be awful. So they knew they had to do something about this. They knew that they had to get the Dagda's harp back. And so the Dagda called to all of the heroes of the Tuatha De Danann, who were all gathered for this battle that they just won. And he said, I have to go and find my harp. Who's going to come on this great quest with me? And all of the heroes of the Tuatha De Danann said, I know I'm really tired actually, I just fought a battle. I don't really want to. I'm going to stay here. So the Dagda went around to all of them one by one and said, go on, come on. Really, we need the harp back. I'll play your favourite song if we get it back. And eventually, two of the heroes of the Tuatha De Danann agreed to go with him. Ogma, the poet, who came up with the first writing in Ireland, and Lugh of the Long Hand, who had just won a great victory in this battle by killing Balor of the Evil Eye. There's seats down the front, by the way, lads, if you want to just come in here and park. You may. It's fine, I won't be distracted. Any more than I am right now, it's fine. So where was I? Ogma and Lugh. They agreed to come with the Dagda to find the Dagda's harp. So they set off. And they very quickly realised that although they had won the battle, and although the majority of the Fomorian army had been killed, the minority of an army is still an awful lot of people. It's a huge army that they brought, so it was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Fomorians that they were tracking. Which on the one hand made things very easy, because they left a huge, big, wide trail of trampled land. Over 7 hills and through 7 valleys and across 7 rivers. But on the other hand it wasn't so good, because by the time they caught up with the Fomorians who'd stolen the Dagda's harp, who were camping in a ruined castle, there were hundreds of them. And how many of the Tuatha De Danann were there? 2 plus the Dagda? Yeah, 3. Not enough. Not enough at all. But the Dagda looked in. They crept up to this ruined castle and they peered in one of the open doorways. And they saw all of the defeated Fomorians kind of lying around, you know, not in a great humour because they just lost a battle. But they had their weapons on them. They still looked pretty ferocious. And on the far side of the hall, up against the wall, hanging like a trophy, was the Dagda's harp. So Lugh and Ogma and the Dagda put their heads together and they said, right, how are we going to do this, guys? We're going to have to try and creep in. We're going to have to try and sneak past all these Fomorians who were just lying about in the hall. And the Dagda said, no, we don't really, because you see, it's a magic harp. So I can just call it and it'll come to me. And they said, well, can you do that without anybody noticing? And the Dagda said, yeah, absolutely. They said, okay, give it a go, Sophie. So the Dagda stepped up and took a deep breath. And from the doorway to this huge, empty hall filled with their enemies, he cried out, fly to me, my wonderful harp! And the 2 boys said, what? I thought you could do that quietly. And he said, that was quiet. And the harp flew off the wall, jumped off the wall and flew through the hallway, knocking the heads of 3 or 4 of the Fomorians as it went into his hand. But everybody else woke up. And all of a sudden, there was hundreds and hundreds of Fomorian warriors looking at them. Oh yeah, it was very scary. It was an intense moment. And so Lugh said to the Dagda, do something. Play something on your harp, come on, do something good. And the Dagda said, alright, give me a second, I have it. So he touched his hands to the harp strings and he played musical laughter. They all started laughing. It's a magic. Tears rolling down their faces, slapping their knees, dropping their weapons and just rolling the aisles, laughing hysterically. All these Fomorian warriors, battle forgotten, enemies forgotten. And then after a couple of minutes, the song ran out. You know, it was the end of the song. And immediately all of the Fomorian warriors picked up their weapons, looked at the three Tuatha Danann and went, alright, that was funny, but still, you're our enemies, rah! And started advancing on them again. And this time Ogma said, Dagda, do something else. Quickly now, we're wildly outnumbered. And so the Dagda said, okay, give me a second. Just think of this now, but I have it. And he touched his fingers to the strings of his harp and he called forth the music of sorrow. And they couldn't help themselves, all these warriors. They just started weeping. Every single one of them remembered the worst day of their life and just felt it all again. And they dropped their weapons and they sank to their knees and they put their heads under their cloaks so their friends wouldn't see them crying. But their friends were all crying as well, and all they could do was just weep until the ground was covered in little puddles of tears. But after a moment, the song came to an end. And then all of the Fomorian warriors picked up their weapons. And again, they started to advance on the three heroes of the Tuatha Danann. And this time Lou and Ogma at the same time said, Dagda, do something else, and this time do something good, will you? Something to actually put them out. And Dagda said, oh right. All right now, hang on, there is a thing I can do. Hang on now, I have it. And he touched his fingers to the strings of the harp. And he called forth the music of sleep. And all of those angry warriors, their heads started to nod. Our eyes got really heavy. And they tried to shake it off and, keep attacking, but just really sleepy all of a sudden. So they started to yawn, and they started to stretch, and they started to kind of huddle up their armour under their heads for a little pillow. They all went to sleep. And when that song came to an end, they were asleep. So it was fine. The three heroes of the Tuatha Danann took up the Dagda's harp and they went back to the rest of the Tuatha Danann. And the Dagda still has his harp and he still plays his harp. But the Dagda is famous for a few things. Not just his harp and his cauldron of plenty. He's famous for his great appetite. And he occasionally has a little bit, just a little bit too much to drink. So now and then, you'll still get rain in summer. And you'll still get a clear day in the middle of winter. But that's only the Dagda. Not really paying attention. a request for the Giant's Causeway, which we're going to do now, as soon as I remember. Would anyone else like to hear a story, or does anyone else have a thing they'd like to hear about? And would anyone else like to come in? Because there's like one stool right up the front here for a really brave person. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, there's a couple of seats here as well. Oh yeah, totally, go for it. There's a couple of seats over here in the corner as well, lads. You just have to walk in front of everyone. Be grand, they won't mind.
You can probably get a few more across. You can bring them up from the other end as well.
Yeah, you can also just drag in a couple of seats from the... Oh, here's the very nice man is holding up a seat.
Hey, nice man.
Yeah, nice man. That seat has a camera on it, so don't sit on that seat. Yeah, you can drag in seats from the other side as well. It's all good. So, welcome. Welcome the punctual people. Well done, you got here. It is not over yet. Just to recap for anyone who's just arrived, this is a folk storytelling, and as folk stories are entirely reliant on folk telling stories and listening to stories, I decided to make it one that you guys decide what the next story is. So I'm going to tell you a story now, but I want to know what story you want to hear after the Giant's Causeway. You know, you can throw out a theme as well, like love story, battle story. What was that? Nishioga. I don't think I know Nishioga. Do you know Nishioga? No?
The Young Fairies.
The Young Fairies.
Those two over there.
Is it just a story about them? Yeah. I think we can maybe do a story with two then. Yeah. They look likely. We can give that a go. Yeah. Anyone else have an idea for a theme or there's a hand up from somebody who's been very, very polite as if in school. Oh yeah. Well, that's Shakespearean, isn't it?
Well, we do know a story about a fellow called Lear who was
There
a
is
king.
there is a King Lear in Irish mythology as well. Yeah, we can tell you the story about Lear. All right, I think we've got enough to be getting on with. So now I'm going to tell you a story about a particular rock formation in the north of Ireland, because there's a lot of people will tell you it was formed by volcanoes and seawater and stuff like that in physics, but really, this is how it happened. See, there was a great hero in Ireland, a great hero. He was the best hero in all of Ireland. He was the captain of the Fianna, which was a band of warriors that defended Ireland from threats inside and out. When creatures came through from the other world, the Fianna would be there. When invaders came from across the sea, the Fianna would drive them back. And their leader was the greatest of them all. He was tall, he was golden haired, he was handsome, and his name was Fionn McCool. And he was really tall. He was about 7 feet tall, like he was a big lad. Beautiful hair. Also on his chest. As I said, he was a good looking lad, and he was the captain of the Fianna. Now, a thing happens when you start doing, anything of note, which is that people start telling stories about the thing that you did. And that was what happened in the time of Fionn and the Fianna. People started telling stories about them, about how great they were and all the battles they'd fought and all the times they'd won. But after a little while, the fame of the Fianna spread so far and wide in Ireland that it actually went over the sea to England and Scotland. And now Irish people, as you all know, never exaggerate at all.
Never in a million years.
Never in a million years, exactly. So all of the stories about Fionn and the Fianna were perfectly accurate in Ireland, but as soon as they got over to England, they started, just adding a little bit to it every time it got told. Suddenly the fight against 100 became a fight against 1,000 that Fionn McCool had won. And suddenly he went from 7 feet tall to 8 feet tall to 9 feet tall to 30 feet tall. And as the fame of this Irish giant spread around, it came to the ears of another giant. A giant in Scotland. A giant called Benandonner. And now Benandonner was a bit of an awkward giant. He hadn't really done much with himself. He just sort of lived in the wilderness, stomping about the place, making the ground shake. And people used to run away from him. So he didn't have a chance to make a name for himself. But he wanted to be famous. So he thought to himself, aha, I know what I'll do. I'll go over to Ireland and I'll challenge Fionn McCool to a battle. And whichever one of us wins the battle, well, I'll win the battle, because I'm Ben Donner. And then everyone will talk about the giant who defeated Fionn McCool, and I'll be famous. And I'll only have to do one thing. It'll be great. But then he found that there was no ship built in the world that was big enough to carry him. So he had to think on it for a while. Now, meanwhile, things were not going great for Fionn McCool, because Fionn McCool was married at this time to the cleverest woman in Ireland. Her name was Una. And that had seemed like a really good idea at the beginning, to marry the cleverest woman in Ireland. But as time went on, he realised that she was always right about everything. And it started to really get on his nerves. And there was a couple of things that she was always right about that she kept bringing up. Such as that when he built their house on the hill of Allen, he built it facing north instead of south. So it was always cold and drafty and damp, never got the sun. And the fact that he had scattered boulders all around the yard, which he said were defensive formations, and she said were getting in her way because she kept stubbing her toes on the boulders. And the most annoying thing was she kept giving out about how long he was away, because he was always out hunting with Fianna. So that every time he came home, she said, "Why did you stay away for so long?" And it started to get just a little bit to the point where he didn't want to come home and explain why he hadn't been home. So he just stayed away a little bit longer. So things were getting a little bit tense in Fionn McCool's home. Now, Ben and Donner had been mulling over the problem of how he was going to cross over to Ireland, because there was no ship built big enough to carry him, and he finally had the giant version of a brainwave, which is kind of like a tsunami. It takes a while though, because he realised that there's actually not that much distance between Ireland and Scotland. You go up to the very far north tip of Ireland. And also, there were these rocks that he could quarry. Being a giant, he could quarry them with his bare hands, just like catch bits out of a cliff. And he found that if he positioned them in the water, these great big pillars of rock, they'd sit on the seabed and make a stepping stone for him. So he started to build himself a causeway from Scotland to Ireland. Just stone after stone after stone, like a little road that went under the ocean. And of course, this took a long time. It was a slow process, because he could only carry one at a time, and then he'd have to put it down, and then he'd have to go all the way back for the next one. And so Fionn McCool, saw him coming, and knew that there was a giant from Scotland coming to challenge him, because he also kept shouting, "I'm coming for you, Fionn McCool!" And so he was very much forewarned, and he wasn't worried about it to begin with, because he saw a fella on the horizon, and he was like, he's not that big. But then he realised that he had made a drastic miscalculation in the small versus far away, as Ben and Donner got closer and closer and bigger and bigger. And when Ben and Donner was actually getting pretty close to the coastline, Fionn realised there was no way he was going to be able to take this lad down. He was huge. Because Fionn McCool was a giant of a man, but Ben and Donner was a giant of a giant. So Fionn swallowed his pride, and he went to ask the cleverest woman in Ireland what should he do. And his wife Una said, "Well, how long do we have to prepare?" And he said, "Well, he's kind of here. See how the ground's shaking?" And she said, oh, okay, great, right, thanks for giving me loads of time to plan. Okay, here's what we're going to do. You take all your clothes off. And he said, "What?" And she said, "Don't ask any questions. The most important thing in all of this is that you not speak a single word. No matter what happens, no matter what you hear, no matter what you see, you are not to say a single thing, or you'll die." Yeah. So Fionn McCool said, "Okay," and she said, "That was a word." And he took his clothes off, and then she wrapped him in a sheet. She wrapped him up the way you would wrap a baby, in a swaddling cloth. And she handed him a great big cheese. Huge big wheel of cheese, and she said, "Not a word." And then she went outside to sweep the front porch and look like she wasn't waiting for the giant, who was already looming on the horizon and striding across the land towards her. And Ben and Donner came up the hill towards Una, and Una looked up and said, "Oh, how's it going?" Ben and Donner was a little kind of surprised because usually people ran away from him. So he said, I can't really do Scottish accents, so I'm going to try. "I'm here to fight Fionn McCool." Yeah, that was a bit Ulster, but anyway. And she said, "Are you? Are you sure?" And he said, "Aye." And she said, "Huh. Well, you're a brave little fella, I'll give you that." It was the first time in his entire life Ben and Donner had been referred to as little. So Una then said, he's not around at the moment, but you're welcome to wait if you want, and sure he'll kill you whenever he gets back. Like, there's no hassle. And Ben and Donner kind of sat down, but he was still a little perturbed, and Una after a while said, "You know what? As you're hanging around, rather than sit there like a lump, you might as well make yourself useful. There's a couple of chores that Fionn McCool usually does of an afternoon, but as I said, he's not here. He's away fighting a real giant, a big one. So every day he rotates the house so that it's facing south and gets the sun and the warm breeze, so if you wouldn't mind." Now, this was a big house, built of stone, and Ben and Donner put his shoulder to it, and he started to heave and huff and puff, and it wasn't budging, and finally, with this horrible grating of stone, the entire house started to move. And he finally rotated it all the way around so it was facing south. And inside the house, Fionn McCool didn't know what was happening, but he stayed quiet. And then Una said, "Oh yeah, that was good, not bad. So come in for an old cup of tea. I'll give you one of Fionn's little cups." And Ben and Donner, squeezed in, folded himself in through the doorway, and sure, what did he see but Fionn McCool lying on bed dressed as a baby, and he said, "It's Fionn McCool." And Una said, "Don't wake the baby. That's Fionn McCool Jr." Ben and Donner said, "But he's got a really thick beard and a lot of chest hair. He doesn't look like a baby." And Una said, "Yes, I'm a little worried about him because he's so small and puny." Now, Fionn was lying there dressed as a baby, but he had this giant staring at him and going, "Pretty sure that's Fionn McCool," and he was absolutely terrified. But he couldn't say anything, so he just squeezed the wheel of cheese that Una had given him to hold, and all of the water in the cheese started to rush out. And Una said, "Oh, good boy! Oh, fantastic! That's great! Did you see that? He finally did it." And Ben and Donner said, "Sorry, what?" She said, "Oh, he finally did it. He finally squeezed the water out of the stone. As I said, I've been a little bit worried about him because he's so small and puny, that he wouldn't grow up to be a giant like his dad, but he's after squeezing water out of the stone, and that means he'll at least be somewhat of a decent giant." Ben and Donner was like, I've never heard of this. What are you talking about?" She said, "It's a giant trick. Any giant can do it. Any real giant. If you want to practice, there's loads of rocks outside." So Ben and Donner went out to all the boulders in the yard. He picked one up and he tried to squeeze it, but it just crushed into gravel. And Una said, "Yeah, no, you have to do it good, not like that, not like you did." And so he picked up another one and he held it in his arms and he tried to squeeze it and he crushed it into sand. And one by one he went around to all these rocks and crushed them to fine powder. Every time he did, Una just went, "You sure you're a giant? Are you sure you're not just a bit tall?" And people got confused. Until eventually Ben and Donner said, "You know what? Irish people are mad. Enough of this. I'm leaving." And he went back to Scotland. But as he was leaving, Una called after him. She said, "Don't worry now. Fionn McCool will follow you on your lovely causeway that you built. He'll come find you in Scotland. Keep your appointment. Anytime you like." So when Ben and Donner got back to the coast, he started to pick up the rocks and throw them back against the coastline of Ireland so that they shattered, so that the terrible Fionn McCool couldn't follow him back to Scotland. And that's the story of the Giant's Causeway. I mean, they're both pretty tragic.
West over here.
Oh yes.
She owes.
What would you like? Oh, you would like the brown bullet coolie. Oh, that's an exciting one. All right, lads. We have two very different stories. So we're gonna do a vote because there's an exciting story or there's a sad story. You want exciting? Okay, so she's voted. But everybody who wants the exciting story, shout now. Everybody who wants a sad story, shout now. Okay, we're going to do the exciting one first. We might get to the sad one still. Come in, lads. There's seats and stools in the middle here as well if people want to like come in and grab your, not your seat. Your seat is taken.
Sorry.
So, what happened to this one again? Oh yeah. Right.
There's a bit of disagreement.
There's a little bit of disagreement
Stuff
going
goes
on.
down.
But
What party you started from?
I'm
In fairness.
yeah, in fairness. I'm gonna do the
Okay.
yeah, and we're gonna skim over all the stuff, and then we're just gonna end it with the biblical.
Okay, so you make farmers and then Bob.
Oh yeah, good idea. Oh yeah, actually, Rue has just reminded me that this is a story about a magical mythical bull. And we can make a lot of noises here on stage, but we can't make the roar of a magic mythic bull without a bit of help. So there's a bit in this where everyone has to roar like the bull. So we're just gonna do a practice roar. If everyone can like, you know, basically, I'm gonna do, and then the bull roared. Like that, but good, okay? Try one more time. And then the bull roared! Much better. Okay, awesome, fantastic. So, this story begins back in the time of the Tua de Danann, long ago, where there were two best friends who were swineherds. That meant they looked after the pigs. And their names were Frucht and Ruach. And one was the swineherd of Connacht and the other was the swineherd of Munster, and I always get them confused as to which one was which. So, doesn't matter. One of them was one and one of them was t'other. They were best friends. And every year, when the grazing was good in Munster, the swineherd from Connacht would drive down his pigs and they'd get nice and fat in Munster. And every year that the grazing was good in Connacht, the swineherd from Munster will drive his up so that they could get nice and fat and everyone could have rashers for breakfast all year round. So they had a great friendship and they had kind of a great partnership as well. But then, you see, people started to compare Rucht to Fruach. Some of them said, oh no, the swineherd of Connacht is better than the swineherd of Munster. And then the people of Munster would say, no, the swineherd of Munster is much better than the swineherd of Connacht. And the only reason the swineherd of Connacht, the pigs, even got a little bit fat is because he brought them down to Munster. And as people started to make these comparisons between them, Rucht and Fruach started to get a little bit tense with each other. They started to notice, they started to compete. And it got to a point where one year, Rucht cast a spell on Fruach's pigs. That's what spells sound like. And the spell had the effect that no matter how much the pigs ate, they didn't get fat. So when Fruach came back home, that autumn when the pigs were to be slaughtered for food for the winter, they were these skiddly, skinny little pigs. And he was told that he was no longer allowed to be the swineherd, because that was disgraceful. He was so angry that he cast the same spell and the other herd of pigs. So they both lost their positions. But that wasn't the end of the fight between Rucht and Fruach. No, no. There was a feast the following year, a feast in Connacht, where the King of Connacht invited the King of Munster and all his people up. And in a corner of the feasting hall, Rucht and Fruach saw each other and started to argue and started to fight. And the fight between the two of them got so bad that it spilled around to all the other people. Everybody started fighting with everybody else. It spread out like ripples in a pool, until the two of them were kicked out and told that until they put this fight aside, they could not be around peaceful people, because wherever they went, no matter what was going on, the two of them would find a way to turn it into a fight. But these were people of the Tuatha Danann, and so they had more spells than just skinny pigs. And so they changed their shape. The two of them became great black birds, and they started fighting at each other in the air. And they flew around and they landed on the side of the King's Hall in Connacht. And they were cawing and they were clawing at each other so loudly that nobody in the King's Hall of Connacht could get a wink of sleep for a whole year that they were there, until finally they flew down to Munster and did exactly the same thing. No one could sleep. Now, a little while after that, people saw two great grey wolves in the woods, and you could tell by them that they were men who had shape-shifted. And they spent their time circling and growling and snapping and snarling and trying, each one to get the better of the other, but they were so perfectly matched in strength and ability that neither one of them could win the fight. And they went on then and on. They changed their forms over and over and over again, trying and trying and trying to defeat the one who had been their best friend, was now their greatest enemy. They turned into great stags, clashing antlers together. They turned into shadow phantoms on the wall, and anyone who saw them fighting would die of fright. They turned into sea monsters, churning the oceans to foam as they fought one another in a great clash. But nothing they did worked. And so they decided at the same moment to take a different tack. They became tiny little eels with rainbow colours on them. And in the mouth of a river they started twisting around one another, trying to snap the other in half, these little tiny rainbow eels. But they were so tiny that when the current came up after a heavy rain, they were pushed in different directions. And they were separated. And they were separated for such a long, long time that they forgot that they'd ever been anything but eels. They only knew that they were looking for something. And so they spent hundreds and hundreds of years searching up and down the waterways and byways of Ireland. They didn't know what they were looking for. They didn't remember who they'd been. And then one day, years and years and years later, the Tuatha Danann no longer ruled Ireland. Everything had changed around them. One day, there was a queen in Connacht. Her name was Maeve, and she brought her cattle down to the river to drink, and she didn't notice. One of her cows swallowed down a little rainbow-coloured eel. And on the same day, up in the Cooley Hills of Ulster, a man named Dara was drawing water for his cattle, and into their watering trough he poured a bucket, and he didn't notice there was a little rainbow-coloured eel in it. And one of his cows swallowed that eel down. Now that didn't destroy them, because they were men of the Tuatha Danann. All that happened was that their forms changed again. And from those two cows, one in Connacht and one in Ulster, two great bulls were born. Now one was called Fionbanach, the white-horned bull of Cruachan, and the other was called the Don Cúinle, the brown bull of Cooley. And as these bulls grew, they grew in fame and in reputation. And eventually, because of some stuff that we're not going to get into, Queen Maeve decided that she wanted to have the brown bull of Cooley for her own. So she led a cattle raid against Ulster. Became known as the cattle raid of Cooley, one of the most famous stories we have. And Cuchulainn held up Maeve's army single-handedly because all of the other warriors of Ulster were cursed and could not fight. And finally, Maeve managed to drive away the brown bull of Cooley, brought him all the way back to Connacht, to the fields of Cruachan, and then the brown bull of Cooley met the white-horned bull of Cruachan. And all of a sudden, as their eyes met in this new form, the two bulls remembered. They remembered all their lifetimes, they remembered all their hatred, they remembered all their rivalry. And in that field before Queen Maeve's house, the two bulls charged at one another, and they clashed. And the crashing that their horns made was so loud it reverberated around Ireland and woke up every baby that started to cry. These bulls tore great rifts in the earth, valleys and furrows as they charged at one another. They knocked the tops off mountains with sweeps of their horns. But finally, Fionbanach, the white-horned bull, took a swipe at the Don Cúinle, and he swung wide, and the Don drove his horn tip through the throat of the white-horned bull, and tore his throat out and killed him. And then he picked up the body of the white-horned bull on his horn tips, and the brown bull of Cooley roared in victory. He charged around Ireland, carrying his trophy on his horns. He went back to Munster, where he'd once been a swineherd, and he threw back his head, and he roared! And he trotted all the way back up to Cooley, where he had been born a bull, bellowing all the way. And when he got back home, back to the place where he'd been born in this lifetime, he let out one last great roar. And his great big heart that was beating so hard in his victory and his triumph, it burst in his chest, and he fell down dead. Okay, that was exciting. Thank you for the roaring. There's more seats still here. People are kind of coming in and out if anyone wants to find a comfy seat. What did we do for the last one?
Any thoughts?
Any thoughts? Any ideas? Well, we did mention him, so we should probably do the Cullen story. Oh, you got your hand up again, young man, yes? Tiernan Og. Okay, two very strong suggestions again. Would we like to hear about? Okay, we're gonna do a vote again, lads. Whoever wants to hear about Cuchulainn, shout now. Yay! Whoever wants to hear about Tiernan Og, shout now. Yay! Okay, some of you shouted both times.
What about that story when Cuchulainn went to Tiernan
Og?
Gotta go to Tiernan Og.
There is now.
There can be.
No, you know what? There There is a story where Cullen goes to turn it out.
Okay.
It's the first bit of the only jealousy of Eva.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go for
All right. Awesome. I just remembered there's a story where Cullen goes to Tiernan Oak, so happy days.
Yeah, because he meets Planet and McLear.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's got Lear in it.
And it's got Lear in it. You asked for Lear. All right. 3 in 1, lads. This is great. If I can... I can. I remember how this started. We'll see how far we get into it in 15 minutes, because it's a bit complicated. So, the time of year that this started, that this happened, is kind of important. Because it was Samhain, which we call Halloween today. It's the time when the gates between this world and the other world are open. And anything can come through and go in and out. And it was a very important time of year for the warriors of Ulster. Because every year they'd gather together by the shores of a lake. I can't remember which lake. But they'd gather by the shores of a lake and they would recount their deeds for the year. They'd tell everybody what happened. But because it was Samhain and because it was a magic time of year, if any of them told a lie or an exaggeration, their own sword would jump up and cut their tongue. So, they had to be really careful not to exaggerate. Not that Irish people ever exaggerate, as we've already established. So the warriors of Ulster had to be on their best behaviour. They had to tell exactly what they'd done and not exaggerate and not make themselves look good in any way whatsoever. Now, the greatest warrior of Ulster at this time was a man named Cuchulainn. He only had 3 faults. He was too young, he was too daring, and he was too beautiful. He was so beautiful he had 7 fingers on each hand and 7 toes on each foot. He had 7 pupils in each eye, and each of them a different colour. And he had 4 colours in his cheeks. And his hair was 3 different colours in it. Black at the root, red in the middle part, and blonde at the tip. He was beautiful, okay? Now, Cuchulainn got an awful feeling of sleepiness as this recounting of deeds was going on. And so he went off to have a little nap by himself. Told his wife Emer where he was going and not to worry about him. And he went away and he lay down under a standing stone and he went to sleep. Now as he was sleeping there, he dreamed a dream. In his dream, 2 beautiful women came walking towards him. And one of them was weeping. But the other one handed her a willow switch, a little whippy stick, and took one up herself. And the 2 women started baiting Cuchulainn till he was black and blue all over. And when he opened his eyes, he was black and blue all over and he couldn't move. Now, his wife brought him home and put him to bed. And every physician in Ireland was called for, but all of them looked at him and said, I don't know, that's a bit weird. He's black and blue all over and he's not getting better. And he can't really get up or move or talk. Because he couldn't talk. So he couldn't tell them what had happened. And all of the physicians were stumped. And so after a while, Emer went to the king's court, Cror MacNassa, and she said, listen, my husband is lying in his sickbed now for months. And I want to know what you're doing about it. Because you and I both know that if you were lying in your sickbed for months, Cuchulainn would leave no stone unturned. He would search high and low and all around the world until he figured out what was wrong with you. So, get up off your throne and go and figure something out, will you? And Cror MacNessa said, alright, yeah, sorry. Slipped my mind, administrative duties and whatnot. And I can't remember how they figured out what was going on. I'm pretty sure it was Laig, Cuchulainn's charioteer, who worked out that this was something to do with the other world. And he managed to bring Cuchulainn back to the same lake where this had happened, but it was a full year later. And as Cuchulainn lay under the same standing stone by the shore of the same lake at the same time of year, sure enough, he saw the same 2 women coming towards him. But this time his best friend Laig was with him. And before they started beating Cuchulainn black and blue with their switches, Lake said, sorry, can I just ask why you're hitting my friend? He hasn't really done anything to you. But one of the women said, no, yes, he has. My name is Liban, and this is my best friend Fond. And Fond is in love with Cuchulainn. And Cuchulainn doesn't love her back, so we decided to beat him up. And Lake said, you can't do that. That's not how like asking someone out works. But Liban said, alright, fine. Listen, I'll let Cuchulainn out from under this enchantment if you come back to my home, Tir na Og, and you defeat the demons that are threatening it. And so Lake and Cuchulainn said, okay, we'll go. And before the eyes of all the people of Ulster who brought them there, they vanished into thin air. But it wasn't thin air they were in. It was the other world. See, Liban was married to Manannán mac Lir, and he ruled over this part of the other world. And they were under a terrible threat, because there were 3 demons that had taken the form of 3 waves that were going to flood the island of Tir na Og and wipe out absolutely everybody on it. And there were armies gathered of the people of Manannán mac Lir ready to drive back the waves. They weren't quite sure how they were going to do it. And when the demons heard that Cuchulainn, a mortal warrior, was the champion that they'd chosen to defend this magical place, they all started to laugh, and it came out like bubbles and sea foam. But Cuchulainn said, just try me. Come on. And he waded into the ocean, and he went under the waves. And nobody saw what happened next, except the ocean started to bubble as if it were boiling, as Cuchulainn fought against the 3 demons under the waves. And when he came back out of the ocean, there were no more demons left. And so he was let go, back to Ireland, after defeating the demons of the other world. But Fond, the woman of the other world who loved him, she came with him. And Cuchulainn informed his wife that he was going to go at Fond now. And Cuchulainn's wife Emer said, no you're not, because here's my knife and I'm going to stab her. And things got very intense for a little while. And then Manannán mac Lir appeared, and he said, look, Fond, you come with me. Because actually I got that wrong earlier. It was Fond Manannán was married to, not Liban. He said, you come with me because I'm your husband, and you leave this woman here because that's her. You leave Cuchulainn here because that's his wife. And Fond agreed with him because she said, look, I have a man who's my equal, and if I take your man away, you'll have no man who's your equal, and that's not really fair, so all right. And Manannán mac Lir shook his cloak between Fond and Cuchulainn so they would never meet ever again, and the 2 of them disappeared back to the other world. But things were not right in the household of Cuchulainn and Emer. As you can imagine, Emer was really mad at her husband for trying to leave her, and Cuchulainn was really angry with his wife for stopping him. And every single day there was some little fight that they'd start having that would just spread out from Dundalgan, so everyone was taking sides. And all kinds of counsellors and wise people tried to make peace between them, but there was no peace to be made between them. So finally, a druid brewed up a potion of forgetfulness, and the 2 of them drank it. And the whole entire adventure, the sickbed, the fighting the demons in Tir na Og, the other woman, it all just disappeared out of their minds. So they were happy again together. Yeah. Good. Alright. That's it. Anybody? Yeah. Thanks a million for coming out, folks. We're Candlelit Tales. This is Oisin Ryan and Rue O'Shea. I almost forgot their names for some reason. I don't know. On music, so give them a.
Sorcha, Hegarty.
Thank you.
Podcast.
We have a podcast. It's called the Candlelit podcast. You can listen to stories on it. If any of the small people want to listen to it, make sure your parents listen to it first, because sometimes we inspire. And we're going to be in the Sugar Club this day week. We're going to be doing a big show as part of the Herstory Festival, and there's going to be all kinds of cool people with us. Farah Elle and Tara Flynn and just Mongoose and who? Aoife Wolf. Yeah, there's going to be like music and stories and comedy, and it's going to be magic. And there's still some tickets left. So thanks a million for coming, and enjoy the rest of Banjo and Bovril.